I didn't scream. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. When the sixth number lit up on the television screen, perfectly matching the crumpled ticket in my hand, I just sat there, frozen, like a witness uncalled in the story of her own life. $3.2 million. The number held still on the screen, cold and precise, while I, Margot Ellison, 38 years old, communications staff at a hospital in Bozeman, Montana, clutched the ticket as if letting go of it might return the world to how it had always been. My apartment was small, tidy, and lonely, like an apology that had never been spoken. No cheers, no one to call, no wine glasses raised. Just me, and the lottery ticket tucked between page 163 of To the Lighthouse, where Mrs. Ramsey softly confessed, "I need nothing but myself." I called Willa, not my mother, not my younger sister, Cassie. I called the one person who, on the day I lost a child no one knew I carried, had asked, "Do you want silence, or do you want someone here?" And she sat with me then, without speaking, but made me feel heard. Willa arrived 20 minutes later. She didn't ask anything. She looked at me, then the ticket, then whispered, "Sometimes the greatest gift isn't money. It's the chance to begin again. But be careful. Money is the magnifying glass of a soul." I nodded, but I already knew there was something she hadn't said. Something I had felt the moment that last number flashed on screen. This wasn't a miracle. This was a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw things I had never dared face. I saw a family not waiting to hear good news, but waiting to divide the spoils. I saw a mother who taught me to be quiet, so my sister could speak louder. I saw family tales I once believed were real, only to realize they were cheating stories in disguise. Not affairs of flesh, but betrayals of faith I had given freely. I used to read revenge stories, tales of betrayal and defiance, but they always belonged to someone else. Now I understood. Sometimes revenge stories don't start with an affair or a slap. Sometimes they begin with silence, decades of it, where patience is rebranded as virtue and sacrifice as obligation. That night, after Willa left, I opened my old leather notebook, the one I hadn't touched since my 35th birthday, when no one threw me a party and I pretended not to notice. I wrote just one line. "Don't share your joy with those who found your grief inconvenient." And beneath it, in smaller print, "Silence isn't cowardice. It is survival's final form." I closed the notebook. Outside, the snow still fell. The apartment stayed still. But something inside me had shifted, not because of the money, but because of the truth. For the first time in my life, I saw clearly where I stood in my family, and for the first time, I decided to step out of it. I woke up at 6:12 a.m., not because of any alarm, but because a strange breeze had slipped through the window crack. My apartment was as quiet as ever, but this morning it carried the scent of something about to end. I stepped barefoot onto the cold wooden floor, poured a glass of water, leaned against the kitchen counter. Morning light in Bozeman always came soft, like an unspoken apology. But today, it landed squarely on the place I'd hidden the lottery ticket, tucked inside page 163 of To the Lighthouse. Right where Mrs. Ramsey begins to understand that no one can save her from the feeling of erasure. I didn't open the book. I didn't need to. I knew I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. But unlike the betrayal stories I used to read, where betrayal exploded like a scream, mine was quieter. It seeped like water from an old roof, unnoticed until the ceiling buckled under its weight. I pulled the wooden chair closer to the dining table, took out the brown leather notebook again, wrote a title in black ink, list of things I won't return to. I began, answering my mother's calls after 10 p.m., sitting at dinner tables where everyone has a seat, but only I have no voice. Being the first to ask, "How can I help?" Being the last to be asked, "Are you okay?" Staying quiet when my sister cries because her tears are seen as more important than my silence. I paused, took a breath, continued, paying off Cassie's debts, being called level-headed just to justify the denial of my emotional needs. Being the one who holds this family together when it was the family that quietly unraveled me at 23. I underline the last one. Forgiving when no one says sorry. I used to believe forgiveness was a sign of growth. But after 38 years, I've learned forgiveness doesn't arrive like sunrise. It has to be invited. And I, Margot Ellison, have never been invited. I've only been expected to offer it. I remember the time Cassie borrowed money for a startup, then used it to vacation in Bali. My mother said, "She needs experiences to grow up." I wondered, did anyone ever ask what I needed to grow? Or was I always assumed to be strong enough because I never caused a scene? I thought of those infidelity stories in movies where the husband cheats, the wife screams. But in my family, no one screamed. Only backs turned, wrapped in smiles. And I realized betrayal doesn't always live in action. Sometimes it lives in the quiet certainty that no one believes you have the right to refuse. I closed the notebook, taped a note to the front page. A survival plan, not a revenge plot. Because hidden revenge doesn't always speak. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stop playing a role you never auditioned for. Sometimes it's silence, but no longer obedient. I finished my glass of water. The apartment stayed quiet, but this time, the silence wasn't lonely. It was the sound of a world being rewritten by my own hand, not by someone else's script. I never thought a dinner chair could make you feel like you didn't belong in your own life. But that Sunday afternoon, when I walked into my parents' house, I felt it clearly. Everything had already been arranged, including the part one was expected to play. Cassie was already there, her earrings the size of teacup saucers, smiling like someone who just signed $1 million contract. My father sat, as always, at the head of the table, silent, but far from innocent. And my mother, she moved through the kitchen, as if still playing the part of the selfless matriarch, keeper of the hearth, though that flame had long since changed color. "You're early," my mother said, not looking at me, her voice as soft as steam rising from boiled potatoes. I smiled, a polite, rehearsed smile, just like all the ones before it. We ate in a silence that felt scripted. The meal was like an old song, performed without a conductor but perfectly in tune. But by dessert, a slice of browned, slightly burnt apple pie, Cassie set down her fork, inhaled deeply, and gave the kind of smile that came prepackaged. "Actually, I've been working on a business idea," she said. "A wellness center, aromatherapy, mindfulness, natural detox. I think it's going to be my turning point." I hadn't even responded before my mother jumped in, her voice loaded with intent. "Cassie really has potential. She just needs someone to believe in her. And who better to believe in your little sister than her big sister?" It wasn't an invitation. It was a strategy disguised as kinship. I looked around the table. For a moment, I felt like I was living in a cheating wife story, but without the husband or the mistress. This was cheating of a different kind. Emotional cheating, where I was being asked to betray myself to fund someone else's fantasy. "You don't have to decide right now," Cassie said, eyes wide, voice trembling with practiced innocence. "But if I win this investment, we all win. As a family, I thought of all the stories cheating I'd witnessed, not in love, but in families, where sacrifice came wrapped in ribbons and labeled responsibility. I thought of the time Cassie borrowed money from me for an interior design course, only to end up posting bikini photos from a beach in Cancun. My mother spoke again. Family is your first investment, and your first lesson in giving. I put down my fork, gently, but the sound echoed inside me like a latch clicking shut. I understood then, this wasn't a meal. This was a true infidelity story. Only no one needed to climb into a bed to betray me. They just had to sit at a table and split up what they thought I owed. I looked at my mother, looked at Cassie, then said softly, I need time to think. I didn't say no, but the silence inside that sentence was the first refusal I'd ever spoken without lowering my head. As I stepped outside, the Bozeman evening wind brushed against my collar. It wasn't cold, just sharp enough to remind me, from this moment on, I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking away from the role they had always insisted was mine. I was taught silence long before I ever learned how to pronounce the word no. In my family, silence was the emotional uniform. It was what we women wore every morning, no matter how fractured we were inside. And if someone asked, is everything all right? We'd smile and reply, I'm fine, just a little tired. I remember clearly the first time I understood betrayal didn't need words. I was 14, standing on the staircase, listening to the phone ring in the middle of the night. A woman's voice floated through the receiver, gentle but misplaced. I'm a colleague of his from the museum, she said. But I knew. Every child raised in family drama stories knows when their mother is pretending and when their father is living a double life. The next morning, my mother made breakfast as usual, placing toast on a plate like a silent symphony. I asked her, you know about it, don't you? She glanced at me and replied with a sentence that shattered my belief in both truth and tenderness. Don't say anything that would bring shame to this family. That's when I learned, in our household, truth came after appearances. And silence wasn't a choice, it was the price of belonging. Recently, after that Sunday dinner, my mother called, not to ask how I was doing, but to gently guilt me. You should reconsider helping Cassie. She needs you. That's what family is, Margot. You've always been the sensible one. I bit my lip, not from anger, but from the ache of a familiar sadness, one that blooms when you realize you're not loved, just used. Her words sounded like affection, but underneath was a blade, rusted from overuse. I once thought an infidelity story only existed between lovers, but I was wrong. Some true infidelity stories live between mothers and daughters, between sisters. There's no sex, no affair, but there is theft of trust, of space in someone's heart, of the right to say no. I didn't answer my mother right away. I simply wrote in my leather notebook. Silence is passed down from generation to generation, like a curse wrapped in the ribbon of morality. I thought of my grandmother, a woman my mother rarely mentioned. She left home for a year when I was little. They called her unstable. But years later, I found a letter she had tucked inside an old Bible. In it, she wrote, if you want to live truthfully, be ready to be called rebellious. I understood. Not everyone is strong enough to break the inheritance of resignation. But I'm no longer the 14-year-old girl on the stairs. I'm a 38-year-old woman rewriting her chapter without the lines that begin with you should or you have to. If there's such a thing as family revenge stories, then this is the quietest version of it. No retaliation, no screaming, just this. I refuse to inherit what was never meant to be mine. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who records their own mother lying. But on a quiet April afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows and glinted off her glasses, while she proudly recounted how I had willingly helped Cassie with a small savings loan, I knew I could no longer stay silent. I hit record from my coat pocket, quietly, as though I were a witness in a courtroom where the actors had long since forgotten they were performing. Margot has always been the kind one, she told her visiting friend. She sacrifices. She never asks for anything. That's what makes a good daughter. I stood just beyond the doorway, my back against the wooden frame, my heart pounding like a ceremonial drum. I wasn't angry, I was cold. Cold like a truth frozen too long. Cold like a smile that had expired. When the guest finally left, I stepped into view. My mother flinched. How long have you been standing there? Long enough to know I'm not the daughter in the story you keep telling. Her eyes flickered. I saw it, the subtle tremble of someone not wounded but exposed. As though for the first time, the light hit her fully and without mercy. What are you saying? She asked. I placed my phone on the table. Hit play. Her voice crackled through the speaker, word by word. Familiar, rehearsed, reverent like a church hymn, except this was a chapel whose wood had long since rotted. You recorded me, not for revenge, for memory, to remember exactly how it feels to be erased. I walked out. I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't expect tears. I wasn't seeking the comfort of a family script. I needed a truth that hadn't been painted over with politeness. That night, I opened my laptop, created a folder called Exposure, screenshots of Cassie's loan requests, old emails, bank statements. I didn't plan to share them publicly. I didn't need burning revenge. I only wanted to prepare for human revenge, Margot style, the kind that doesn't destroy anyone in public, but forces them to face a mirror they've long avoided. I thought of the family tales I'd grown up with, of mothers as pillars, sisters as silent blessings. But I've learned, sometimes, family betrayal isn't one single act. It's a story repeated so many times it becomes history. I closed the laptop. The night wind slipped through the open window, biting at my palms. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to be the good one. I don't want to destroy anyone, but I will no longer let them write a script that includes me without asking my permission. That's a new kind of revenge, a solitary truth that stands firm. No screaming, no knives, just presence and the refusal to leave. I used to think the cruelest betrayals came in the form of a slap, a lie, or a hug that had lost its warmth. But sometimes, betrayal comes dressed as a proposal and wears the soft disguise of family. Cassie knocked on my apartment door at 7 p.m. The Bozeman sky still held a pale light, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. She didn't bring flowers, no pie, just a paper bag and a voice rehearsed to the edge of charm. I know you're still upset, she said, but I have a real investment opportunity this time. I let her in, not out of generosity, but because I wanted to see just how far kinship could bend to fit around entitlement. Cassie spread the paper on the table. A business plan. The project title in bold, Sanctuary, a place for mental healing. I read each line. Steam rooms, meditation zones, weekend retreats with silent therapy. The irony was sharp. She was selling silence as a service, when my own silence, once, had been seen by this family as weakness, stubbornness, and a failure to understand sisterhood. I just need $75,000, she said, her voice trembling. I've changed. Truly. This is my second chance. I didn't speak for a long moment. Then I looked her in the eye and asked, Cassie, do you remember who paid off your credit card debt in 2019? She bit her lip. No answer. And 2021? When you said you were depressed and needed a healing vacation, she lowered her eyes. I nodded, not with anger, but with a quiet ache. An ache for all the versions of myself written into these family tales as a background character. No lines, no ending, just there to support everyone else's development. I opened the drawer and pulled out an envelope. It didn't hold money. It held printed statements, old text messages, apologies that never came. I slid it across the table. "I don't need you to say sorry," I said. "But you need to know, I'm no longer the person you call after failure." She sat frozen, like someone who'd never been denied before. Like this was the first time in one of those cheating stories where the betrayer wasn't met with understanding, but with a closed door. I stood, opened the door. The night wind was cool and honest, unlike the sweetened promises of family loyalty. "I forgive you, but I won't invest, and I won't return to my old role." I watched her shoulders stiffen as she crossed the threshold. I don't know how she'll retell this later. Maybe I'll become the villain in the revenge stories she crafts for comfort. But that doesn't matter anymore. I've stepped out of the loop we called family, when in truth, it was obligation dressed up as tradition. That proposal wasn't a chance. It was a verdict, and I chose not to sign it. I found the notebook on a quiet Saturday afternoon while cleaning out the old drawer I call the forgotten corner. It was buried beneath receipts from 2012 and an unsent birthday card. A small notebook, black leather cover, its pages tinted with age. No title, no dates, but I recognized the handwriting. It was my mother's. I opened it. Every page bore my name and Cassie's, along with dates. 2003, Margot paid Cassie's final year of tuition. 2007, Margot helped Mom fix the roof. 2010, Cassie organized Mom's surprise birthday with money Margot sent. On and on. A record no one asked for, but someone carefully kept. No thank yous. No warmth. Just acts and numbers, as if love were something to be audited. I sat still, frozen like a relic surviving a silent explosion. Some might call it a love ledger, a way to remember sacrifice. But to me, it was an account book of expectation, where love was not measured by emotion but by duty, wrapped in the ribbon of family morality. I thought of how many betrayal stories in my life didn't come from outsiders, but from those I once believed were home. Not loud betrayals, but quiet thefts of trust, of belonging, of the right to say no without guilt. I flipped to the final page. One line stood alone. 2022, Margot refused. No punctuation. No explanation. As if the one time I protected myself became an unforgiven debt. I set the book down. Looked out the window. The oak tree outside had started shedding leaves. I remembered what my grandmother once said. Some silences are love, but some loves are traps built from the denial of self. I wasn't angry at my mother anymore. Anger is for those who still carry hope. I had moved past that. What remained was clarity, a quiet reckoning that infidelity stories don't always begin with lies. Sometimes they begin with silence when understanding is needed most. I tore out the final page, burned it in the old brass ashtray. The fire made no sound, but inside I heard something. I was no longer part of that love record. Not because I sought vengeance. I didn't need hidden revenge. I was simply rewriting the language of love on my own terms. From now on, love would no longer be something I was forced to prove. Love, when not free, is just a debt disguised in the bloodlines of obligation. I used to believe that family was the place one returned to when the world became too unfamiliar. But sometimes, family is the very place that makes you feel like a stranger, right under the same name you've signed on every Christmas card. I received the family meeting invitation on a Monday morning. No subject line. No warm greeting. Just this, we need to talk. Everyone will be there. Location, the old house. Sunday. Again. As if every staged intervention in my life had to be performed under the tired yellow lights of a Sunday afternoon. I went, not because I needed to forgive anyone, but because I wanted to look them in the eyes and ask, When you said family, did you actually mean me? Cassie smiled like nothing ever happened. Mom poured tea, her hands as steady as ever. Dad sat there, still and silent, like the stone figures in stories cheating, where the man never speaks, but his silence is a form of complicity. You have to understand, we were just doing what's best for the family, Mom began. I wanted to laugh, but my voice came out low and raw. We. I looked at each of them. Cassie, the little sister who borrowed money to enroll in a self-growth course, but posted pictures in a red bikini at the beach. Mom, the woman who once stood between me and harm but always turned her back. Dad, the man whose absence became the architecture of my childhood. I took a deep breath and laid on the table copies of receipts, emails, ignored pleas. Each time I was used, each time I said no and was called selfish. You say family, but your actions were a true infidelity story, not between husband and wife, but between trust and pretense. I lived through a cheating wife story, but I was nobody's wife. I was just the one fooled into believing that if I gave enough, I would be loved. Cassie forced a smile. You're being dramatic. No, I said. You're just simplifying betrayal by calling it a mistake. I stood up. I had thought I'd cry, but there were no tears left. Only a strange clarity, like walking out of a bewitched house where every step echoed the same lie. Family is everything. No, I thought. Family isn't everything. Not if everything means losing yourself to fit the image they need you to be. I walked out of the old house. The sky was turning violet. The wind was cold, but not sharp. I didn't look back, because sometimes bravery isn't in staying to forgive, but in walking away to finally be honest with yourself. I never thought I'd return to the old house because of a will. But then a short call from the attorney pulled me off the highway and straight into memory lane. Your father wanted everyone present when the filing cabinet is opened. A filing cabinet, not a final letter, not a heartfelt goodbye, just an old steel cabinet tucked away in the basement, where everything was locked, including emotions. The house was silent when I arrived. No hugs, no tears, just the steady ticking of the grandfather clock, reminding me that time does not care whether you were loved or not. The lawyer used a tiny key. I wondered how something so small could unlock so much unspoken damage. The will was in the bottom drawer, clipped neatly in a plastic sleeve. Next to it, thick folders of receipts, letters, old family photos, even medical reports I never knew my father had. He began to read. His voice was flat, as if reciting an invoice, not the fragments of a life. My father left the house to Cassie. Then came my name. Margot, the responsible daughter, is to inherit her grandfather's pocket watch and be given final say over the memorial fund. Not money, not an apology, a dead watch, and a responsibility disguised as an honor. I froze, not out of disappointment, but because I saw for the first time how love gets rewritten into family drama stories, where silence is labeled stability and those who crumble get all the grace. I remembered an infidelity story in our family, not of my father cheating on my mother, but of both of them cheating us through absence. They lived like polite coworkers. No fights, no passion, just two actors lost in the wrong script. I used to hope for a true infidelity story to explode, something real. But the real betrayal was quieter. A slow erosion, the kind where people look right through you and still call it love. I stood up, said nothing, but as I reached the door, I turned around. I don't want the watch. Let Cassie have it, but I will keep one thing, memory. And this time, I'll write it in my own voice. Cassie opened her mouth, but I was already walking away. That's how family revenge stories truly begin. not with curses or knives, but with a woman who refuses to inherit pain. I drove away from that place, not feeling lighter, but clearer. No one can take from you what you no longer let them define. My dearest child, I write this letter to you even though you do not exist. Not yet. You are still a fragile thought suspended between hope and hesitation. And I am still here, alone in my small apartment, listening to the crackle of the heater like the quiet heartbeat of all the years I've lived without anyone to shield me. You may never come into this world, but still I write, because I need to speak to someone who has never betrayed me, never taught me how to stay silent to make others comfortable. I used to think I was born to be the backdrop of other people's lives. Our family tales always began with gratitude and ended with resignation. I lived them as though I had no choice. I was the responsible sister, the understanding daughter, the one who answered midnight calls for help, money, advice, rescue. But no one ever asked if I was okay. Child, there is something I want you to know. Sometimes, revenge is not retaliation. Sometimes it's rising from a dinner table where love is conditional. Sometimes it's rewriting yourself without waiting for anyone's permission. I chose a kind of human revenge, quiet, stubborn dignity. And I paid for it. They called me cold, ungrateful, a traitor to blood. But the truth is, family betrayal didn't begin when I walked away. It began long before, when they refused to let me be myself while I stayed. If you are ever born, I promise this, I will never cast you as a side character in someone else's story. You will have a voice. You will have the right to make mistakes, to be angry, to be silent without being labeled ungrateful. You won't grow up hearing, I sacrificed everything for you. You'll grow up hearing, I chose honesty because I loved you. No strings, no guilt-wrapped affection. Maybe at the end of my life, I'll be the only one who ever reads this letter. Maybe you will never arrive, but writing to you heals me. Because in you, I do not see obligation. I see possibility, the chance to be a mother without losing myself. And maybe, just maybe, burning revenge can look like this, loving a child who refuses to repeat the pain we were born into. This letter isn't just for you. It's for me too, for the version of me who sat in a room full of relatives and still felt like a ghost. From now on, I won't need others to write my story for me. I will be the one to tell it. And if you come into being, you will be heard. And if no one believes I ever mattered, you will be the proof that love can begin again, from the gentlest whisper to a soul yet to take shape. I received the interview request 3 days after the news broke that I was the woman who won the lottery and cut ties with her own family. They called me, the woman who feared no one, a viral symbol of personal freedom. They said my story was the kind of fuel revenge stories were made of. They wanted me on the cover, beneath the headline, "Silence is her weapon." I rewrote my reply 4 times. Each time, I deleted it before I hit send. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer saw the need to let someone else tell my story through their lens. People love family tales, so long as they can flatten them into digestible fables. A woman wins the lottery. Her family betrays her. She rises, a neat tragedy with a glow-up ending. A postmodern Cinderella, minus the glass slipper and magic wand. But the truth is Messier. The truth is, I cried in my mother's bathroom on my 36th birthday while my sister screamed that money had made me heartless. The truth is, there were nights I laid still, as if my body had become a suitcase of generational guilt. A suitcase they never unpacked, only tossed more expectations into. I declined the interview not because I'm ashamed of my past, but because I've lived in it long enough, and I've learned that sometimes cheating stories aren't about love affairs. They're about the quiet trade of trust for a cleaner narrative, I don't need to be rewritten as an icon. I don't need to be turned into a hashtag for resilience. I just want to be myself. A woman who no longer waits for a thank you to know she was enough. When I was a child, my mother once told me, "You don't have to say everything. People only believe what they're ready to hear." Back then, I thought she was teaching me discretion. Now I know. She was preparing me for a world where the truth is a luxury. I didn't give them the interview, but I wrote a handwritten note, just one line. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to retell your pain in someone else's format. I slipped it into an envelope, no signature, because this time I wasn't seeking recognition. I was seeking release. Release from the role I'd played in revenge stories with no end. Release from being a footnote in family tales authored by people who forgot I had a heart. I'm not saying I've forgiven. I'm saying I've stopped performing. And sometimes, that's the most beautiful ending a real person can write for herself. I moved to the outskirts after that long, gray winter. A small house, walls painted eggshell white, an old stone fireplace, and wooden windows that opened to a forest dusted with silver leaves. Nothing was modern. Nothing was excessive, but it was quiet enough. No one knew I was here. No one knocked on the door to check in. No more tense dinners. No more midnight calls cloaked in guilt and disguised as just checking on you. I had gone far enough away from the betrayal stories they kept retelling like some unchangeable family myth. Each morning I wake when the fog still hangs in the trees. I brew a pot of tea. I sit by the window and watch sunlight fall through the linen curtains my mother once mocked as too plain. But in that light, I began to understand. Not all silence is emptiness. Some silence is the purest form of presence, your own. I used to think I needed to win, to be vindicated, to make them look back and say, she was right. That was the seed of many hidden revenge stories, not with knives or screams, but with icy glances and small, deliberate gestures meant to reclaim power. But one afternoon, closing an old journal, I realized I didn't need their apology anymore. I needed to stop waiting. That was when the real silence began. Not the silence of pain, but the silence of release. I'd seen enough infidelity stories to know betrayal isn't always about two people in a bed. Sometimes it happens at the dinner table, in a mother's averted eyes, in a sister's half-hearted, you understand, right? In a father's nod that felt like an erasure. But I've walked through all that. I'm no longer in their narrative. They can keep telling it, but my voice no longer echoes inside their version. It stays with me now, like a whisper rising from my notebook in the still of the afternoon. No one knows how close I came to tearing everything apart, to burning the letters, the photographs, the keepsakes. But I kept one handkerchief, forgotten by my mother in the back of a drawer. Not because it was beautiful, but because I needed to remind myself, forgiveness isn't for them. Forgiveness is for me to keep living without the weight of performance. I no longer speak to my family, not because I hate them, but because I've stopped begging them to listen. This wasn't a goodbye. It was a step out of the noise. And the quiet stayed, not as an enemy, not as a friend, just as the calm presence of a woman who walked through hell and no longer carries it on her back. Because in the end, not all pain needs to be shouted. Some wounds only truly heal in the tender stillness of being believed by yourself.